Video this morning about this Paul Vanderklay, Paul Antleitner, John Vervaeke conversation. Vanderklay put out another video last night with some people, which I haven't watched all of it. I just started it. Nick B was there, and they were talking about why... Okay, so first off, that conversation resonated with a lot of people. I'm not used to recording this way. I gotta look over here. And I thought it was really good. And why people pay attention, and particularly when something pops up that is more salient to a higher number of people in this little corner of the internet, I think it's, it's pointing to something. So... and Nick said that often, and I was talking to him a little bit after this too in the chat. He was saying that often when he wants to re-engage with his community more, it's when Vervaeke is involved. And he elaborated a little bit on why that is, and I think it's because part of it is when you get really familiar with any community or anything and you've mapped things, they can become boring is a negative way to say it, or monotonous. There's not a lot of and I told him it reminded me of come on, why does my recall suck? Michael Martin, Dr. Michael Martin, in his conversation with, maybe it was Nate and Vervaeke, or maybe it was one of the Grail Contra conversations. Anyhow, he said that Rudolf Steiner said that he wished he could reinvent the word anthroposophy every day so that it wouldn't become dead, essentially. And this gets into something I've called before, just de-spirited words or de-breathed words. I think the problem with language is that it can become, when it becomes map territory, and when you associate a word with an idea and it becomes mapped and familiar, it becomes a platitude, and there's a death that comes with familiarity. It lacks this kind of auto renewal that happens, and so then that's where you get into the evolution of language, and that, which I think is intricately tied to the evolution of consciousness. And so when Vervaeke's coming in with his fancy Vervaeke words, and he's talking about new things and tying it to science, it's reinvigorating Christianity in a way, and religion in a way that is helpful. And part of what's helpful about it too is Vervaeke has much more technical knowledge and an understanding of history. Probably, way more than most common lay people that are in church. So he's, he reads a lot of these ancient people. He reads, he's familiar with a lot of the, with some of the fathers, and with, he's been reading D.C. Schindler, which is fantastic, Hans von Balthasar, Master Eckhart, Dionysius. So he's read a lot of these people, Aquinas, to some degree, and a lot of Aquinas, I think, is tied into Dionysius. I've heard somewhere in the Summa he quotes Dionysius like 300 times or something like that. So a lot of this ancient mysticism and Neoplatonic thought is tied into more ancient forms of Christianity, and particularly Orthodoxy. So it's not surprising, and kind of with the boom of Orthodoxy in this little corner and how that's interesting people, it's not surprising to me that Vervaeke is reinvigorating this. And my impression was, I said this, and sorry, Paul, but I think in ways Vervaeke, sorry, Paul Vanderklay, I think that in ways Vervaeke understands Orthodox Christianity and I mean that probably at big O and little o, propositionally, better than Paul does. And I distinguish with the propositional because this gets into what I would talk about with thinking and believing. And I often talk about the difference between thinking and believing is because it is possible as a human being, because we live in what I call this divided man phase where we can be double-minded. We can think that we believe something. This gets into a lot of psychoanalysis and Peter Rollins stuff, and not believe it. This is where delusions come in, and being self-deceived, and the things that I want to do I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do I find myself continually doing. We are a double-minded man, unstable in all that we do. We're like someone who looks at himself in a mirror and then goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like, is what St. James says. So we can do that all the time. And so just because that we assent to propositions does not mean that we believe them. This is the whole Jordan Peterson thing. Belief is action. Belief is being. Belief is rooted in ontology, and it's who you are, transcendent of space and time. And so, also interestingly, Vervaeke, in his conversation with Paul, he said, God is that which is immanently transcendent and transcendently immanent. And that's like one of my Christian koans. So I don't know. Vervaeke and I are swimming in somewhat similar fields, and I think that's also probably because Vervaeke, I believe, or I would think, is a non-dualist, which I think is intrinsic to Orthodox Christianity as well. So I think all these reasons are why Vervaeke is reinvigorating conversation, and he's being earnest with it. And the last thing that I would say is a tie into Melchizedek. And I mentioned this to Yosef on the Discord the other day, that I'd like to talk to him, one of our resident Jews that we love. I'd be interested in talking to him sometime about Melchizedek, because Melchizedek is this figure, this somewhat mythic, biblical, Christian, and Jewish figure of which the author of Hebrews talks about and references as Jesus being a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And what does that mean? And Melchizedek is this kind of, liminal, hard to talk about figure who was a high priest of the Most High God that Abraham met and offered sacrifice and tribute to, who was a priest of the Most High before Abraham. So there's a priest of God before Abraham who is the father of Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And so if you think about it in kind of a hierarchy of sorts, or fractally, down upstream of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is Melchizedek, is a high priest of God before Abraham. Well, he is, very briefly, without going into it, and in the 30,000-foot view, I think this points to God reconciling all things. And Paul Antleitner, in that conversation about 2/3 of the way through, said something that I thought was fantastic. I can't remember what the timestamps were. I made a comment, I believe, in his video, Deep Talks, Exploring Theology, and it was, he essentially said that because one of the best parts of the conversation, before I go into that Paul Antleitner, John asked, how can Christianity move forward without subsuming everything else? Well, this gets into, in my opinion, I think, perennialism, universalism, and John was talking about the differences between pluralism and perennialism. I would love to talk to him about that. I made a video about what I think is the difference between Christian perennialism and religious pluralism. To me, religious pluralism is downstream of the Enlightenment, and has to do with choosing between multiple options. But I already see Christianity as the religion without a religion that also has a religion, because they talked about playing jazz, because in order to play jazz or to play any music, jazz, yes, there maybe is not a there is and there isn't a leader. and you have to play at a harmony. This is where I would get into like the Silmarillion and the spirit of the Anur and the music of creation. And this is what the mystical Christ is about. There is a director who I believe became eminently transcendent in Christ, who is directing everything, in which we have to, when we're playing our jazz, we are playing in harmony, in accord. We are playing in the same resonances of that initial music, or else you're, and even if you don't, this gets into the music of the Anur, even if you're Melkor playing a discordant note, well, that gets subsumed into the whole, and it's almost as if you can't play a different song. Well, Melchizedek is getting back further to that at-one-ment. The priest who was before the divisions. And Christianity, to me, and that's what Jesus is, and this gets at what Paul was talking about, Paul Antleitner, is he had a beautiful section in there where he was talking about, I'm trying to remember all the points that he brought up, where if you look at, he said there's a big difference between moving from there is no salvation outside the church to there is no salvation outside of Jesus. And I think it depends, because I would affirm there is no salvation outside the church or Jesus. It's all the same thing. But it also depends on what you mean by that. I don't think if you limit Jesus or the church to your own mapped left brain, Ian McGilchrist, controlled, mammonistic, formulaic ability to control, you're trying to bottle the spirit, and it's not going to happen. But then Paul went on to say, Paul Antleitner, that if you understand, I would say, both Jesus and the church as, there's a great David Bentley Hart article called Traditio, like, Deformis or something, I don't know, whatever that, like, Latin or whatever it is, it's not good. I'll try to put it in the notes here. But he talks about, he's deconstructing Calvinism, and he basically says that Calvinism understands election as mainly exclusion. But David Bentley Hart says when you understand the whole biblical motif, and I would say this even back tying into Melchizedek, is there's exclusion for inclusion. And so there is selection for, the way Paul Antleitner said it, sorry Paul, was that you are elect to bring in, to include. The point of election is further inclusion. So again, it's not an either-or thing, it's a non-dual thing. So, of course, to be eminently transcendent and for God to manifest to the world, he had to choose a people. So he chose Abraham. And then he had to choose, and then it's a choice of Isaac. It's a choice of Jacob, the heel grabber, the second. Well, I mean, and David Bentley Hart walks through some of this in that article. That's really good. And then you get to Christ, the ultimate particular, but also simultaneously transcendent, because he is the Christ. He is not only Jesus, he is also the Christ. And so it is immanent and transcendent at the same time, universal and particular. And so you get both. Then this is why Christianity is all about unity and multiplicity. And then you get the church, which is Christ in that particularity, remanifest to the whole world, so that everyone, so what it means to be a Christian is to be a little Christ. It is to be Christ of the world. It is to be his body. The church is his body. So is there salvation outside the church? No. But the church is there as a vocation to bring in the reconciliation and the redemption of all things, which is Apokatastasis. So that's a lot of things. It's Melchizedek, that's the church. It's why I think Vervaeke is being helpful in reinvigorating, re-illuminating, quickening, re-enlightening. I like enlightenment. John was saying he doesn't like, or he was talking with, what's that other quirky cat, Jordan Hall, about why he didn't like enlightenment and he liked it versus a different illustration. Whatever, that's an aside. I'm gonna wrap it up. It's about 15 minutes. I won't forget to link that David Bentley Hart article, which I first got from Nate, which is beautiful. Nate Heil gives me many good things. I am eminently thankful for a lot of my close friends in this corner for allowing these discussions to even take place. Sometimes when I really meditate on the group of people that I have through this technology, which is crazy, that I just have at such immediate ability to talk to, it's mind-boggling. So let me know what you think. Peace.